Had you ever wondered what it would be like when the world stopped running? When the street you have walked 1,000 times disappears under the snow, does the depth of the snow rewrite the scenery? When the hum of daily life, the sounds of cars, the voices of people and the rhythm of business fall silent under a blanket of pure white. The blanket is so complete that it almost makes one feel sacred. Tonight, we go back to January 1978, when the heart of the United States fell silent, when nature reminds millions of people that all our schedules and certainties are fragile things that can be easily wiped away by wind and cold. As we prepare to stroll through the silence stripped by heavy snow in the Midwest and Northeast, I hope you can give a thumbs up. It's just a small signal telling you that you're ready tonight. If you want these journeys to wait when you need them, subscribing will make them within your reach. Tell me where you are listening and what time it is now. Some of you are stepping into a peaceful night, while others are entering a bright day. We are all sharing this moment together. Now dim the lights, find the silence in the room, and let's start to quietly review history. The calendar reads January 1978. An AM radio is playing disco. The gas station is still pumping lead-minus containing fuel. The Cold War buzzed in the background of every news broadcast. This is a distant anxiety that most people have learned to ignore. Winter has arrived in the northern states. An ordinary winter is foreseeable and controllable, for there is something gathering in the atmosphere, something that instruments can hardly understand. Two huge air systems, one ruthless from the Arctic and the other warm and humid from the Gulf of Mexico, are heading towards collision over the Great Lakes. The pressure dropped to some extent, causing senior meteorologists to pause on their charts and examine their figures. Most people didn't notice. They go to work, cook dinner and complain about the cold, just as people often do in winter. They still have no idea that in a few hours, the world they know will be buried beneath the white wall. The road will turn into a river of snow. Time itself seems to stand still. Let's start from where all the big storms begin on an ordinary morning minus in the last few hours before everything changes. On the morning of January 25, 1978, you woke up in a heavier silence than usual. It's not the kind of tranquility just after a snowfall, but something denser and more anticipated. The air itself seems to be holding its breath. Your bedroom is very cold. The stove had been on all night, but the coldness still sneaked into the corner, seeped into the floor and stuck to the wall. You pulled the blanket tighter for a while, delaying the inevitable encounter with the cold air outside your warm cocoon. When you finally stand up, your feet will be hit by the floor, and even if you wear socks, they will still be very cold. You dragged your feet to the window and drew the curtains aside. The sky was flat, colorless gray, as if pressing down on the roof. The snow has begun to fall, but gently, almost adorning light. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing you haven't seen 100 times before. When you were making coffee, the radio in the kitchen is buzzing. Between songs you have listened to too many times, the announcer's voice will become a little more serious. Winter storm warning, heavy snow is expected, which makes travel difficulties. You've heard of this before. You poured a cup of coffee and began to think about your work for the day. Work, errands, the routine for Wednesday. But some things have been bothering you all the time. Perhaps it's the air pressure in your sinuses, or the strange nature of the light. The wind has begun to test the windows, pressing more and more persistently against the glass. You are dressed in layers of sweatshirt, a flannel shirt and a sweater. Consider buying an extra pair of socks. Although the temperature shown by the thermostat was reasonable, the room still felt a bit cold. It's as if the cold has seeped in through an invisible crack, preparing for what your consciousness has yet to grasp. Outside, your neighbor is scraping the frost off his windshield. You both wave your hand. Neither of you spoke. These days the wind has blown away the sound. You don't know yet, but this is the last morning of the world as you understand it. When night falls, all familiar landmarks will be wiped away. By tomorrow, you will measure time in a different way, no longer in hours or days, but in the intervals between radio broadcast, the time it takes for candles to run out, and the endless rhythm of shoveling. It began to snow heavily around 10 a.m. You were at work. The fluorescent lights in the office continue to make monotonous sounds, as always. The coffee has been on the stove for too long. Familiar faces are more common than those of your own family. Someone mentioned the weather. Some people always mention the weather. At this time, there is a worrying problem. The radio in the lounge reported that several countries had issued travel warnings. The snow is falling faster than the plow. The wind is getting stronger and stronger. You have already looked out of the window. The parking lot is under renovation. The neat lines of the car are softening, becoming hints beneath the accumulation of white. The trees along the boundary swayed and bent, their branches outlining wild patterns under the grey sky. By noon, the management made a decision. Everyone should go home before the situation gets worse. Pack up your coat, scarf and gloves. Nowadays, the practice of bundled sails gives people a more serious and well-considered impression. You are not only preparing for the cold, but also for something unknown. As soon as you step out, the wind hits you like a physical force. It has no gusts of wind, but advances steadily and ruthlessly, carrying not as much snow as when flying horizontally. These thin slices are small and hard, almost like tiny ice grains. They'll sting when they touch exposed skin. The parking lot has become a peculiar sight. The car is already half buried. Snowflakes drifted on the windward side of the car, forming sculptural shapes that seemed almost intentional and almost artistic. Your car is somewhere in the third row. You think you can see it. It took too much time to walk through the parking lot. The snow has already reached your ankles, and with each step you take, you sink deeper. The wind is tearing at your coat, finding every crease and seam. Your eyes are weeping because of the cold. You squinted your eyes towards the flying snow, trying to determine your position. When you finally reach your car, you realize what has happened. The driver's side was buried in a layer of snow up to the door handle. You start digging with your gloved hands, shoveling away handfuls of snow. The snow feels strangely dense and almost solid. When you are awake enough to open the door, even though you are wearing gloves, your fingers have already gone numb. The engine started to spin. Thank God, you made it run, waiting for the warmth that came too slowly. The other vehicles around you are trying to leave. Some successes. Others in vain spun their wheels, sinking themselves into the snow that accumulated minute by minute. It takes 15 minutes to dock to home. The whole journey takes 1 hour and 20 minutes. The road vanished. There are no lanes left. There is no clear boundary between the sidewalk and the shoulder road. Only the faint traces of vehicles passing in front of you have been filled with freshly fallen men. When you can see the tail lights through the white light, follow them. Sometimes you can't see them at all. Driving blindly for a long time, believing that memory and instinct will keep you on the path you hope for. The wipers on the windshield are struggling. They tap the rhythm on the glass, a steady, almost hypnotic sound, but they could hardly keep up. Every time you clear the snow, it will immediately block your view again. If you lean forward, hold the steering wheel tightly, and your shoulders are tense. Other cars have also been given up. You pass them, or you think you did. A black figure was curled up by the roadside, already swallowed up by the snow. You want to know if people are still waiting inside or if they have given up their vehicles and sought refuge elsewhere. When you finally walk down your street, you will feel a great sense of relief, but the street itself is no longer recognizable. These houses are like islands in the white sea. The trees on both sides of the boulevard have turned into ghostly figures, their shapes distorted by the heavy snow and the constant cold wind. You park, or more precisely, you park the car in approximately the correct position and then turn off the engine. Suddenly, the car fell silent, with only the low whistling sound outside breaking the silence. For a moment, you sat there, gathering strength for the next task. The distance from your car to your front door could be 30 feet or a mile. You walk into the storm, and the wind immediately tries to push you back. The snow is already half a truckload deep and is accumulating higher and higher. Every step requires effort. Raise your leg. Insert it into an uncertain depth. Look for the purchase, and repeat. The wind is howling. Everyone uses this word howl, but unless you have experienced it yourself, unless you stand in the midst of the fierce wind of a snowstorm, you cannot understand this sound. It is not a note. This is an undulating chord, screaming at the corners and among the bare branches. An ancient yet vivid sound, as if the storm itself were a creature with voice and intention. Snow fills your collar, seeps into your sleeves and stings your face. You lower your head and push forward. When you reached the door, you were already having difficulty breathing, and your lungs were aching from the cold air. Inside, you take off the layers of snow-covered clothes on the entrance passage. Your coat is covered with ice. Your boots will leave puddles on the floor. Although the room is very warm, you are still shivering. Your body still remembers the cold invasion. The house feels a little small now. Windows, which are usually connected to the outside, have turned into TV screens that only display one channel, white static electricity. The wind blew on the glass, causing it to bend. You can hear it looking for every crack in the wall panels and every loose tile, testing the integrity of your residence. You turn on the TV. Local news has entered emergency broadcast mode. One state after another on the map is covered with white vortices. The meteorologist's voice was calm yet firm. This is historic. This is unprecedented. Don't travel. Stay indoors. Prepare for long -term power outages. The phone rang. Your mother has reported for duty. The circuit makes crackling sounds due to static electricity. You assured her that you were at home. You are safe. She told you to fill the bathtub with water just in case. If possible, you can find a flashlight to check on your neighbor. Before you could say goodbye, the queue broke out. Just like a winter afternoon. It gets dark earlier in the afternoon, but it feels more thorough. Snow erased the distinction between the earth and the sky. Everything is white, and you will find yourself losing the horizon and the sense of going up and down. You began to get ready, walking around the room, and increasingly felt surrounded. You fill the pots, pans and bowls with water. You collect candles and matches. You take out the camping lamp from behind the closet and check the battery. You open the cabinet fork and goods and calculate in your mind how long they can be kept. The stove was turned on and off, and he worked, even harder than usual. You stand near the vent, feeling the warm air and assuring yourself that the system is still running, but you can sense the cold rushing in from outside, passing through the walls and into the remote corners of the room. Night fell, although you couldn't precisely point out when the white darkness turned into a deeper white, then grey, and then a special kind of glow. The snow itself seems to be shining, reflecting any faint light. The power went out at 7 o'clock in the evening. The lights dimmed and dimmed again. You hold your breath. Then, with a gentle mechanical sigh, everything darkened. Silence is direct and profound. The stove stopped humming. The refrigerator stopped humming. The clock on the microwave oven has gone black. All the white noises in modern life, those sounds that you can no longer hear, have vanished. All that remains is the wind, your own breathing, and the sudden loud heartbeat. You light a candle. The flames cast moving shadows, making the familiar room seem strange. Wrap yourself in a blanket. If there is a fireplace, lie beside it. If not, squeeze beside the gas stove in the kitchen. It's getting colder and colder in the room. You can feel it. Warmth is gradually being stolen away. The radio has become your lifeline. You carefully turned the dial and found the frequency for the emergency broadcast. The batteries are old. You need to make them last longer. Give yourself 5 minutes every hour to listen. The news is the same every time. The storm is still ongoing. The road is impossible. The power workers were unable to respond. Stay indoors. Save food and water. If possible, go and visit the older neighbors. But going out, or even to the house next door, seems impossible. Through the window, you can hardly make out the shape of your neighbor's porch. The light is now dim, just like yours. The spaces between the houses are like the Arctic tundra. You want to sleep, piling up under each of your own blankets, but the cold makes your sleep intermittent strange. You dream of being buried alive, of endless white, of searching for something you can't name in the snowy corridor. You often wake up lost, looking at your watch by the candlelight, and each time you are astonished at how little time has passed. The wind has never stopped. It has become a companion, an entity with emotions and rhythms. Sometimes it's screaming, sometimes it's moaning, and sometimes it turns into a whisper. At those moments, the silence felt even more ominous, as if the storm were gathering its breath for another attack. The morning will reveal the full scope of your new reality. The window was partially blocked by snow. Looking around, the world has been completely rewritten. Your car is a smooth, white mound of earth. The fence around your yard is gone. Road signs, mailboxes and fire hydrants were all gone, buried under the snow, measured in feet rather than inches. You've never seen such a thing. You have experienced winter all your life. But this is different. This is not snow that has fallen and accumulated. This is the white snow, which has changed the basic terrain of your world. You need a shovel, not because of where you are going. You don't have it, but because the front door is blocked. Some instinct tells you that you must keep a way out, an escape route, even if there's nowhere to run. Put on all your warm clothes, and you open the door. Snow pours down into your entrance. The white wall in front of you is as high as your chest. Start digging. Snow is very strange. The top layer is powder, but below it is compressed by the wind into something denser, almost like concrete. Your shovel managed to bite it in with great difficulty. You lift, throw, lift, throw. Within a few minutes, your shoulders will get hot. In less than 10 minutes, you will be sweating in the cold. Within 20 minutes, you need to stop and breathe. Your breath forms white clouds that are blown away by the wind. You look back on your progress. You have cleared about 3 feet. The drift extended another 10 feet before you reached what you thought was the sidewalk. While you were standing there, the snow had already begun to fill the place you had just cleared. Snowflakes blown by the wind swept across the ground and landed on your shovel marks. It is only then that you realize it was in vain. This is not a storm that can be overcome merely through hard work. This is a storm that you can only endure. You hide inside. Your clothes are soaked with sweat and melting snow. You change into dry clothes and hang the wet ones beside the fireplace, hoping they will dry out. You're shaking again. A deep cold caused by insufficient exercise. The house is obviously colder. When you are not near a heat source, you can see your breathing. The corner of the room turned into a cold area. There is frost inside the window. The water pipe hasn't frozen yet, but you know it's only a matter of time. Light the oven and leave the door open for warmth. It is helpful, but it will also deplete your gas more quickly. You also need to rationalize this. Everything must now be rationed. Heating, food, water, energy, hope. Time has become strange. There are no usual marks. Work, dates, TV shows, the arrival and disappearance of the day are all predictable patterns. Time weaves together and spreads out. You have no idea what day it is today. Thursday, Friday. There is something written on the calendar on the wall, but the sense of time in your heart has vanished. The radio remains, your only connection to the big world. You know you're not alone. Millions of people are experiencing the same loneliness, the same cold, and the same surreal white stimulation. The entire Midwestern parts of the Northeast have been paralyzed. The National Guard has been mobilized but is almost unable to act. Some people froze to death in their cars, some were wrapped outdoors, and some were overwhelmed by the cold when the heating in their homes malfunctioned. Try not to think about the last part. You measure your day by small tasks. The food allocated to you, a can of soup for lunch, is slowly heated on the gas stove and eaten directly from the pot to save the water needed for plates and washing dishes. Melting snow is not potable water because the warning of boiling is serious and your fuel is limited. Check if there are any problems around the house. An ice dam formed on the roof. The vent that needs to be blocked with a towel. The cold slowly seeped into the basement. You write by the candlelight, though you don't know why. Perhaps it's just to maintain some normal and meaningful connections. You record your experiences, describe the sound of the wind, the quality of the light, the strange faults that emerge in isolation, and the silence between gusts of wind is profound. At those moments, you will realize that the usual sounds have completely vanished. There were no cars, no planes overhead, no distant sirens, no sounds of neighbors, no barking of dogs. Only silence, as if the entire human world had been silenced. You find yourself recalling the past, other winters, and the snowy days of your childhood. Those snowy days seemed magical rather than terrifying. Do you still remember making snowmen in the excitement when school was closed? This isn't that one. This is snow as the enemy and winter as the enclosure. Your body begins to adapt, although it's not comfortable. You've worn so many layers of clothes that you've lost your shape. You are a jumble of sweaters, coats and scarves. Your movements are slower, more thoughtful and energy minus saving. Your hands are always cold. Even if you place them near the stove, the heat seems unable to seep in. There is a strange numbness in your fingertips, and you are worried about getting frostbite, even though you haven't been outdoors for long enough. It was just the persistent cold that seeped into everything. Sleep became deeper and more urgent. Your body wants to hibernate to preserve resources. You find yourself sleeping for 10 to 12 consecutive hours, wrapped in a blanket, close to any heat source you can maintain. Your dream is vivid and strange, filled with endless white landscapes, seeking warmth, being buried, digging out a way out, only to find yourself buried again. Hunger is always by your side, but you can resist it. Food must last. You have no idea how long this will last. The radio kept saying soon, but soon was meaningless. When you feel that every day is eternal, you will notice other changes. Your skin is dry and your knuckles are cracked. Even though you applied Vaseline, your lips are still chapped. The perennial white outside the window and the dim candlelight inside the room make your eyes tense. Your muscles will hurt due to the cold, because of the continuous trembling tension, and because of the brief shoveling of soil with nothing to show for it. The emergence of routine matters is not out of choice, but out of need. When the light began to penetrate the blocked window, you woke up, even though the light was abundant. Dawn is grey and reluctant. You lie in the nest of the blanket, postponing the moment when you must face the cold. Finally, hunger or bladder cramps. You rise rapidly unmoved to the remaining heat source. The embers from last night's fire, the igniter on the stove, and the warmth accumulated in your own breath. In the small space where you have learned to limit yourself, you allow yourself to have a cup of instant coffee brewed with water heated on the stove. You hold the cup in both hands, absorbing its warmth, to make it last longer. The broadcast is at the top of each hour. 5 minutes of listening, repetitive but necessary news. Which roads are attempting to reopen? Which places have already established emergency shelters? And what does the weather forecast predict? It's always the same advice. Stay indoors. Save resources. If possible, check out your neighbors. You can't view your neighbors. The distance is too far, the snow is too deep, and the cold is too dangerous. A long time has passed. When you have enough time, you read by the light of the window, the old books and magazines you read before, anything that can occupy your mind. When the light is dim, you sit in the semi-minus darkness and keep the candle. You think more about food than you think. You dream of steaming hot meals, sumptuous food, going to restaurants and ordering whatever you want to eat. These thoughts are both comforting and painful. You think of warmth of summer, of the feeling of the sun on your skin, and of complaining about being too hot. This kind of complaint now seems absurd and almost offensive. The wind is still blowing. It has become the sound of the storm, a constant narrator of your captivity. You will find yourself listening to its changes, learning to predict its ups and downs, and knowing when there will be gusts when the house starts to shake. It gets dark early, always early. Darkness is no longer terrifying. This is just another fact. Like the cold, like heavy snow, you no longer light 1 or 2 candles. You had a small meal. You listened to the radio. You wrapped yourself in a blanket, waiting to sleep. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow are the same until everything changes. In solitude, small things become important. You notice the frosted pattern on the window, exquisite fractal formation and reorganization. The mathematics of nature makes it visible. You will find that this is a kind of beauty you have never had before, the combination of beauty and threat. You will notice the quality of quietness. You realize that you have never truly experienced quietness before. There is always something. The hum of electricity, the hum of distant traffic, and the sounds of human civilization around. There is nothing in the space between the winds now. There is no sound at all. At first, it will make people lose their way, and then it is almost like meditation. You will notice your thoughts more clearly, without the usual distractions, TV and radio beyond your fixed time, and the hustle and bustle of your normal life. Your mind has time and space to roam. Some ideas are dark. The fear of cold, the fear of running out of food, the fear of pipes eventually freezing, and the fear of never-mind ascending storms. The other thoughts were surprisingly calm. The memories of the one you love. Thank you for your protection. no matter how cold it is. Recognize one's own adaptability. Your perception of time is different. The clock time has almost become meaningless. You're currently undergoing surgery on your body time. When tired, sleep when hungry, eat when needed, move. This is an ancient thing that connects you with humans living before schedules and dates, who measure their days by light and darkness as well as the need to survive. You notice that you are talking to yourself, not often but occasionally. Small comments, observations, and questions. Is this water enough? The wind is stronger today. I should have something to eat. Your voice sounded strange in the empty house, both familiar and unfamiliar. The storm is still ongoing. 3 days because you can't count them all. The radio said that this galaxy was huge and moved slowly, as never before. They use words like historic and catastrophic. These words left a deep impression on you. You live in it. You don't need adjectives. You wait. This is the current situation. An exercise of waiting. Not waiting for any specific event. Just waiting for it to end. Waiting for the situation to change. Waiting for the world to return to normal. Waiting itself is a kind of torment. The cold you can withstand. The hunger you can endure. That waiting, not knowing when it will end and uncertain what will happen next. This is more uncomfortable than physical discomfort. If I wake up tomorrow and the wind has stopped, you will find yourself making a small deal with the storm, with time, and with any force that might listen. If I can survive today, if the power is restored, imagine the moment of being saved, the sound of snowblowers in the distance, the flashing of lights, being able to open the door, see the neighbors, hear the voices of humans, and become a part of the world again, rather than being isolated in your small and cold living environment. But now, just wait. The snow is still falling. The wind continued to howl. The cold continues to strike. You endure hour after hour. A silent struggle repeats itself endlessly. A test that you would never ask to take. You are one of millions of people going through the same test. Although you can neither see them nor reach them, somewhere beyond the white, life goes on. But at this very moment, in this house, in this storm, time has stopped. You are compressed into the eternal present. Cold, white, endless, waiting. Now let's shift our focus from the experience of the storm to its prediction, from those who endure it to those who foresee it. John William Hamilton was not a person seeking attention. In the photos of that era, he wore a pair of wide lens-framed glasses, and his sparse hair was neatly combed to one side, looking very thin and small. His smile, when it appeared, was hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if it would be popular. He was wearing a short minus-sleeved but unminus-down shirt with a pocket protector, a uniform worn by American professionals in the middle of the last century, who used sophisticated instruments to find comfort in data. Since 1956, he has been working at the National Weather Service of the United States, stationed in Cleveland, Ohio. For more than 2 decades, he has been studying the sky through numbers, air pressure, humidity percentages, temperature gradients, and wind speed. While others saw clouds and shapes, Hamilton saw systems, patterns, and the intangible structure of the atmosphere. His office was a windowless room filled with humming machines everywhere. The teletypewriter kept chatting and outputting data from meteorological stations throughout the region. The walls were covered with charts, isobaric graphs, black minus and minus white satellite images, and the tracking sheets he had carefully marked. The air was filled with the smoke of cigarettes and the smell of burnt coffee, and everywhere was the musty smell characteristic of government buildings. Hamilton prefers this kind of environment. Here, the chaos of human interaction is replaced by the clearer logic of the meteorological system. Ling Feng has no emotions. Pressure gradients do not require small talk. The atmosphere, though complex, follows rules. It makes sense in a way that people usually cannot understand. He lives alone in a shabby apartment in Lakewood. He was married once in his 20s. 2 years later, she left. She was frustrated that he worked long hours, was distracted and liked to discuss problems during dinner. No children. Since then, his relationship has been short and unsatisfactory. Those women who initially found his intelligence very attractive later grew tired of his inability to devote themselves wholeheartedly and didn't care about anything as much as he did about the weather. He didn't blame them. He knows himself very well and is aware of his limitations. Some men are naturally suited to family life, to a warm yet chaotic one. He was born for instruments and data, for the quiet satisfaction brought by precise predictions. But on the morning of January 23, 1978, when John Hamilton sat at his desk drinking his third cup of slightly warm coffee, he had a feeling that he had rarely experienced before, uneasy. The data from the monitoring stations in the West is very unusual. Although not unprecedented, it is still very close. The powerful Arctic high-minus pressure system is advancing southward from Canada. The extremely cold air can make exposed skin dangerous within minutes. This alone is not remarkable. The Canadian air mass moves southward regularly in winter. But there are other things. A low-minus pressure system forms over the Ohio Valley, pulling up the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. The warm and humid air meets the cold of the Arctic. Similarly, this in itself is not rare. The collision of air masses is the engine of all weather. What held Hamilton back was the strength of the two systems and the speed at which they converged. He spread the chart on the table and traced the path of the projection with his fingers. The low-minus pressure system is deepening rapidly, and the speed at which it loses pressure indicates that it will become a severe storm. High pressures are advancing southward with extraordinary force and intensity, and they will almost directly meet above the Great Lakes. He calculated it over and over again. These figures remain consistent and are becoming increasingly shocking. His colleague Dave Morrison, a younger meteorologist with more social poise but less experience, brought new print results. "Did you see it?" Morrison asked, throwing the documents onto Hamilton's desk. Hamilton nodded slowly. "The merger took place here." He tapped on the map of Indiana. "Wednesday night, Thursday morning." Morrison said it would be a terrifying snowstorm. Hamilton looked up at him. "It will be more than this." By noon on the 24th, Hamilton had sorted out his analysis report. The storm will move northeastward from the Ohio Valley and intensify as it moves. The air in the Arctic forms a funnel behind it, causing a temperature difference of 50 degrees or more. Wind speeds will remain between 30 and 40 miles per hour, with gusts possibly exceeding 60 miles per hour. There is still snow. Snowfall will occur at a rate of 2 times per hour, and maybe even higher during periods of enhanced precipitation. His forecast indicates that most areas of Ohio, Indiana and Michigan will experience 12 to 20 snowfalls, with some regions possibly seeing more. But he believes that the real danger is the wind. The combination of heavy snow and strong winds can create white conditions. Drifting can make roads impassable, and cold winds can be life-threatening. He typed out the weather forecast and sent it out through the channel. Then he called the local TV station and chatted with a few acquaintances he had developed over the years. The other party's response was very polite, but also somewhat skeptical. "Yes, a snowstorm is coming, but a heavy snowfall of 12 to 20 degrees seems to have it. Wind speed over 60. Expressed out. It was January in the Midwest. People expect it to snow. This prediction feels a bit exaggerated. If it doesn't come true, it will make the Meteorological Service Department look very stupid." Radio manager John said, "Ungrateful for your reminder, but we can't make people panic every winter storm." Hamilton pressed his glasses against his nose, which was his habitual posture when he felt stressed. "This is not every winter storm. We will mention it in the evening weather forecast. Tell people to be careful. This is not enough." Hamilton knew this was not enough, but he had done what he could. He issued a warning. Whether people noticed it or not was beyond his control. That night, he stayed alone in the office, looking at the continuous stream of data. These systems are converging as predicted. If there is any difference, it is that the intensity of the storm is faster than what his model shows. At midnight, he left the building and drove home, crossing the streets where it had already begun to snow. He doesn't sleep well in his apartment. He kept standing up, checking his barometer and listening as the wind began to rise. At dawn on January 25th, Hamilton returned to his office. Morrison has arrived, looking tired and anxious. The situation is even worse than we imagined, Morrison simply said. Radar shows a huge comm system rotating over Indiana and Ohio. It is snowing heavily throughout the area. What Hamilton cared about most was the wind. The isobaric lines on the barometric chart are closely arranged, showing a strong wind gradient. The Arctic high is advancing southward with tremendous force, while the low pressure is deepening further, creating a pressure difference that brought to strong winds. The reports have been delivered one after another. Interstate 75 in Ohio is closed. I-16 is closed in Indiana. Visibility was 0 in several counties. The governor of Ohio is preparing to declare a state of emergency in the state, but the storm has only just begun. Hamilton and his small team worked in shifts, but such shifts became meaningless. No one went home. When they could no longer keep their eyes open, they slept on the floor of the office. When I woke up, my body was stiffened. I felt dizzy. Back to the chattering machine and the constantly ringing phone. He released one update after another, each more urgent than the last. Strong wind warning, blizzard warning, travel ban. It's nice that people stay indoors and don't try to drive. Remember, this is not a normal winter storm. The building itself also began to struggle, flickering. The backup generator began to operate, emitting a low rumbling sound that could be felt even through the floor. The heat became intermittent. Hamilton was wearing a coat, his fingers stiff from the cold, marking on the chart while answering a call from an emergency management official. Outside the small window of the lounge, the whole world vanished. There was only white there, blown by the wind into a solid snow wall, and even the parking lot below was not visible. Someone turned on the radio and kept listening to the local news. Reports kept coming from the radio about people being trapped, vehicles being abandoned, and the entire community being cut off from contact. Then came the first death. An elderly man in Toledo tried to walk to his neighbor's house for help. When his body temperature dropped, they found him frozen to death 50 feet away from the door. Hamilton closed his eyes upon hearing this. He felt pressured, rather than responsible, because he had warned them, but still very sad. This is the meaning of numbers. This is the translation of pressure gradient and temperature difference by humans. This is death written in the language of meteorology. The storm lasted all day and continued until evening and the next day. In that windowless room, artificial lighting and constant noise made Hamilton lose track of time. Day and night become meaningless. Only a storm can be tracked, measured, reported and observed to unfold with the terrifying precision that only hindsight can possess. For occasionally, he would have a sandwich from the vending machine, cold coffee, and anything others brought back from the lounge. His eyes were burning hot as he kept staring at the screen and charts. His back ached as he leaned over the instrument. During several hours of phone calls, his voice grew louder and louder, repeating the same message to different officials, media organizations, and anyone who called for information. Morrison was working beside him, silent, basically processing the data efficiently. They formed a rhythm. Morrison is dealing with daily updates. Hamilton focused on a larger analysis, attempting to predict when the situation would come to an end. Because it will come to an end. All storms are like this. The question is when and how much damage it will cause. The phone kept ringing. A woman in Sandusky, her husband went to work 2 days ago and hasn't come back yet. Can they tell her about that area? Can they tell her when the road will reopen? Hamilton offered little comfort, only news. These roads are impassable. Visibility remains close to 0. He is very sorry. An emergency coordinator in Fort Wayne inquired about the situation in the southern part of the storm. They are trying to transport supplies from Indianapolis. Which route is the safest? Hamilton looked at the map. There is no safe route. Everything has been shut down. Everything. A hospital administrator in Toledo reported that ambulances were unable to answer the phone. They have patients in need of first aid. What should they do? Hamilton was speechless. He is a meteorologist, not a miracle worker. He can tell them about the pressure system and the snowfall rate. When the storm made action impossible, he couldn't tell them how to save lives. Was it the second night or the third night? Hamilton was no longer sure. The power was completely cut off. This time it wasn't just a flash, but a complete failure. The backup generator was buried under the snow and the ventilation system was blocked. The emergency light came on, and the dim yellow light cast a long shadow. The machine fell silent. The continuous humming of the teletypewriter had turned into white noise and suddenly stopped. In this spine-chilling silence, Hamilton could hear the wind howling and pounding against the building outside. For the first time, he felt a near-panic. Without electricity, they have no data, cannot track storms, and cannot communicate with the monitoring station network. They are blind. Morrison began to install battery-powered equipment, a small radio transmitter and a portable radar receiver, which could at least receive some satellite data, but it was fragmented and incomplete. Hamilton stood up and walked to the window of the lounge. He pressed his face against the glass, trying to see something beyond the white chaos. There is nothing but a storm, endless and consuming. How many people are trapped here outside now? How many people are both cold and scared, not knowing if someone will come to help? How many people are beyond redemption, having lost their lives to the cold, living in remote areas, and not being found until weeks later when the snow melts? He remembered his apartment, empty and dark. He thought of his ex-wife. No matter where she was now, she might be with her new husband, both safe and warm. He recalled all the traces he had made, which led him to this windowless room in a dark building, watching a storm he had predicted but couldn't stop. John Morrison's voice rang out behind him. The battery receiver is working properly. New data has come in. Hamilton turned around the window and returned to those numbers. There's nothing else to do. On the morning of January 27th, the storm began to weaken. It's not sudden. The weather system doesn't work that way, it does so gradually. The pressure began to rise. The wind weakened from a continuous strong wind to just gusts. It had been snowing heavily for over 40 hours and was gradually turning into light snow. By noon, the dark clouds had dispersed. The filtered, pale sunlight touched the buried earth for the first time in several days. Power supply to the Meteorological Service building has been restored. The machine resumed operation with a humming sound. Hamilton and Morrison, exhausted and disheveled, began to sort out the final data. These figures are astonishing. The snowfall in most of the disaster-stricken areas exceeded 20 millimeters. Some places reported 30 or even more. In areas with concentrated snow accumulation, the snow can reach 10 feet, 15 feet, or even 20 feet. The wind speed in Cleveland can reach up to 79 miles per hour at its peak. The storm has killed at least 70 people in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. The death toll is expected to rise as rescue workers reach remote areas. By any standard, this is historic. This is the most severe snowstorm in the history of this area. Just as Hamilton predicted, although he was not satisfied with his own prediction, the governor of Ohio personally called to thank him. The TV station requested an interview. The regional director of the National Meteorological Bureau sent a commendation. Hamilton refused to be interviewed. He wrote a brief technical summary about the storm for the official record. He carefully filed the charts and data for future analysis. Then, on the evening of January 28th, finally someone changed shifts for him and he could go home. He walked into the cold and fresh air. The world has changed. The street is a canyon chiseled out of the snow. Abandoned vehicles are sitting at strange angles, and half-minus buried monuments attempt to travel. A roof drooped under an unbearable weight. The trees were peeled off, breaking their bony fingers pointing towards the sky. But there is also light. The sunlight shone on the snow, brilliant and almost painful. The sky is deep blue, so pure as if it were made. The air was crystal clear and sharp in the lungs. After several days of merciless wind, it came to a complete standstill. Hamilton stood for a long time in the parking lot of the Meteorological Service building, just breathing, just looking. His car was parked somewhere under a snowdrift. It doesn't matter. He can walk. He needs to walk. The journey home took more than an hour. The sidewalk was impossible, so he walked along the street, following the rough path left by the early rescue vehicles. Others also appeared. They were wrapped up tightly and blinked their eyes in the sudden bright light. They looked at each other, recognized their shared trauma, nodded, exchanged brief greetings, and admitted that they had both gone through significant events. When Hamilton finally returned to his apartment, he stood at the door for a while before going in. It's very cold inside. The heating has been off for several days, but it's still not as cold as outside. It's not as cold as during the storm. He doesn't even bother to take off his coat. He just sat on the sofa with his eyes closed. He has finished his work. He witnessed its arrival, warned everyone he could, and followed it throughout its terrifying duration. He provided people with information. This is the only thing he knows how to give. Whether this is enough or whether it has saved even one life, he will never truly know. What he knows is, the atmosphere follows rules, but within these rules it is chaotic. You can predict a storm, but you can't control it. You can warn people, but you can't let them listen. You can use the pressure gradient to measure death, but that doesn't mean it's not real ultimately. He thought of the man in Toledo who had died 50 feet away from his door, so close to refuge, to warmth, to life 50 feet. Did he hear the forecast? Did he understand the danger? Or he might, like many others, believe that he can manage to prevent things from being so bad, because the wrath of nature is something you can negotiate with. Hamilton opened his eyes. The apartment was very dim, and the winter light had already dimmed. He should give up, turn on the heating and cook something to eat. But now he sits in the cold and silence, feeling the weight of the past. A few years later, 5 years, 10 years, it's hard to say exactly when, a young meteorologist named Sarah Chen joined the Cleveland office. She has just graduated from graduate school and is passionate and confident about the new technology that will completely transform weather forecasting. She will be assigned to the same room where Hamilton worked. As young people sometimes do, she would browse through old documents and be curious about the history of this place. She would find a folder in a locked drawer of Hamilton's desk, which contained a stress log from January 1978. They are handwritten, with Hamilton's precise annotations, and every reading is carefully recorded. However, there are still some other things in the blank spaces that are not technical in the equally meticulous handwritten notes. My name is Mary Thompson. Her husband is missing. There is no comfort. The ambulance at Toledo Hospital was trapped. The death toll is on the rise. At the bottom of the last page, there is a sentence. We can see them coming. We can't stop them. Chen would sit at that table, holding those papers, and learn something about the people who had worked there before her. It should be understood that behind every forecast, every warning, and every probability of precipitation, there are people. Whether these people are cold or warm, safe or dangerous, alive, all decisions are made based on imperfect science and incomplete information. She would carefully put the files back into the folder, then into the drawer, and then turn to the computer screen to view the real -time satellite data stream and powerful models that could now accurately predict, which was something Hamilton could only dream of. She would think, we can better predict their arrival, but we still can't stop them. John Hamilton retired in 1985 at the age of 60 after working for the National Weather Service for nearly 30 years. There was a small ceremony, a plaque and a not minus, say minus large amount of pension. He moved to Arizona perhaps in search of warmth, simply to get away from the site where he had worked all his life. In 1992, he died of heart failure and passed away alone in a rented apartment in Tucson. The obituary of the Cleveland aircraft dealer was 3 paragraphs long. The article mentions his career, the role he played in predicting the 1978 blizzard, and his years of service. It didn't mention that he had never married, had no children, and had few close friends. It didn't mention the sleepless nights when the storm kept repeating in his mind, wondering what else he could do. But in the meteorological field, among those who know his achievements, his name is remembered. People studied and analyzed the weather forecast he released on January 24, 1978, and took it as an example to prove that even before the advent of complex computer models, good predictions could save lives. Because life is saved, not all. 70 deaths are too many. That without warnings, without travel bans issued based on his predictions, and without the preparations allowed by his predictions, there could be hundreds or even thousands of people. The storm did cause casualties, but not as many as they should have. This difference, those lives saved by early warnings, those who stayed at home upon hearing the forecast, those who stockpiled supplies, and those who did not travel. This difference is Hamilton's legacy. He will never know which legs his predictions have saved. They will never know that they should thank him, but they do exist. Fathers who have returned home, a grown minus-up child. The entire future unfolds because someone sits in a windowless room with a pair of careful hands and tired eyes, correctly interpreting the language of the atmosphere. Today, decades later, when meteorologists gather for a meeting to discuss the development of storms and forecasting techniques in history, the Great Snowstorm of 1978 is always mentioned. John Hamilton was no different. There was no drama, no grand declaration, but rather a quiet respect, a respect for a person. He accomplished his work excellently in difficult circumstances. He foreseen what was about to happen and spoke out loudly. He held his post in the storm, tracking and reporting, as a bond between external chaos and people striving to survive. From his photo, we can see an unremarkable person. That is to say, he looks like most of us, without heroic gestures or condescending authority. He is just doing his job alone, applying the skills he has cultivated through a lifetime of patient learning, attempting to make a difference in a world that is not always listening. Perhaps this is the most important part of his story. It's not that he is special, but that he is very ordinary. His power does not stem from personal charm or authority, but from meticulous attention to data and patterns, as well as from the subtle signals sent out by the atmosphere before the outburst of anger. In an era of instant messaging and complex predictive technologies, it is easy for us to forget how new our mastery is and how fragile our understanding is. We can see that the storm is forming on the other side of the earth. We can precisely track them, but we still can't control them. We still can't protect everyone on their way. We can only observe and warn, and hope that these warnings will be taken seriously. This is a work by John Hamilton. This is his life. On those cold winter nights when the wind begins to blow and the sky turns into that special grey shadow, it means that snow is coming. Somewhere, and meteorologists are in front of a screen and instruments, reading data, doing calculations, preparing predictions, continuing the work that Hamilton had begun, and maintaining the vigilance he had kept. The storm will still come. The atmosphere still follows ancient patterns. But we observe, we warn, we remember. Sometimes, in the blank spaces of our notes, during the quiet moments between predictions, we think of our predecessors. Ordinary people do extraordinary work. They save lives they have never met before and they protect us in the most difficult times. We would think of John Hamilton sitting in a windowless room, his glasses sliding down from his nose, carefully marking, interpreting the sky through numbers, seeing it before the storm arrived, observing, warning and waiting. This is work. This has always been our job. Now let's shift from the story of humanity to something more unfamiliar and broader. Snow itself has become the guardian of time, the guardian of moments, and the medium through which the past whispers to us. In Greenland, far from the cities buried by the 1978 snowstorm, scientists drill into the ice that has accumulated for thousands of years. The drill bit slowly and carefully drills down to extract the core, which is a cylinder at freezing time. Each layer represents a year, sometimes a season, and sometimes, in the case of major events, a storm. Ice remembers everything. Dust from volcanic eruptions several centuries ago, the ashes of forest fires during Columbus voyages, the chemical characteristics of industrialization, nuclear test. The influence of human beings on the atmosphere has gradually accumulated, and there are storms, especially storms. Every major weather event leaves traces in the density of ice, the proportion of oxygen isotopes, and the tiny bubbles trapped in crystals like memories. Somewhere in these ice cores, preserved in ice, longer minus lasting than countries and languages, is the signature of January 1978. Moisture from the Gulf of Mexico meets Arctic air over the Great Lakes, forming snowfall that covers millions of square miles of area. Some of them reached Greenland. Some of them turned into ice. Some of them became permanent. In this way, during those winter days, the snowstorms that terrorized the Midwest became eternal. Long after all those who have experienced it have died, long after the last photo fades and the last story is forgotten, ice will still remember. Silence, patience, waiting for someone with the right tools to interpret its story. Among them, there are both comforting aspects and disturbing ones. Our sufferings have been preserved and our struggles have been recorded. At that moment, the seemingly endless storm turned into a thin line on the ancient ice layer. Compared with the thousands of storms before and after, its significance was not important. Time collapses in the ice. Now has become the past, has become the geology, and all of this has eventually melted. In those days of January, every snowflake is unique. This is not only poetic but also mathematically correct. The crystal structure of ice and the way water molecules combine in a hexagonal pattern allow for such tremendous variations that none to snowflakes in the history of the Earth have been exactly the same. Think about it. Every snowflake that touches your face in the storm, every snowflake that accumulates on your roof, windows and car, every single one of the billions of crystals that fall, each one is an individual manifestation of physics and contingency, a temporary sculpture of frozen water, and will never be completely repeated. They form above the clouds. Below the clouds, ultra-cold water droplets encounter dust particles, or ice crystals and start to freeze. When each crystal passes through the atmosphere, its shape is determined by the temperature and humidity gradients it encounters. Even a slight change in temperature, if it is only a fraction of a degree, can alter the growth pattern. If the humidity here is higher, the branches of the arms will be different. The lower the temperature there is, the more disc-shaped the crystals will form, rather than needle-like shapes. When each fragment reaches the ground, it follows a unique path, encounters unique conditions, and arrives with a unique structure. Then it landed, and within seconds or minutes, the personal identity vanished. It merged with millions of other companies. The boundary has vanished. What is unique has become collective. Perhaps there is a metaphor here. Each of us is different, shaped by the unique experiences in our lives. However, we landed together, merged together, and became part of something greater, erasing our individuality, even if it was built by it. The drifts that trap people at home are composed of individuals. Countless unique snowflakes are pressed together by the wind, weight in the environment. Beauty is buried under heavy burdens. Mathematics has become a disaster. In the oldest stories told by mankind, winter has never been just winter. It is always a metaphor, always a symbol, always something more important than frozen water in dark days. Norwegians are talking about the changeable winter, that is, the great winter before Ragnarok, the end of the world. 3 consecutive winters have come, with no summer in between. The sun will be swallowed up, the stars will disappear, snow will fall from all directions, the cold wind howled. Brothers fight their brothers, the kinship will disappear. In that endless winter, the world will prepare for the final battle. Perhaps those trapped in the 1978 snowstorm, watching the snow accumulate higher and higher and the days become increasingly blurred, felt the echo of that ancient fear. They are afraid that winter will never end, that the cold will last forever, and that the world they are familiar with has come to an end. The Inuit people living in the Arctic regard winter as an eternal companion rather than a seasonal visitor, and they have developed a complex vocabulary for ice and snow. They have words to describe snow that falls slowly, falls quickly, floats, forms specific shapes, is suitable for construction, and is dangerous to walk on. Each word not only represents observation, but also survival knowledge. The ability to interpret the white landscape, understand its emotions, its dangers, and its gifts. In their story, winter is the seed otter Sedna, whose wrath can freeze the ocean and send out storms to punish those who violate the old ways. When hunters take too much, when they show no respect for the animals they kill, and when they forget the ritual of maintaining balance, Sedna will withdraw her blessings. The fish will disappear, seals will hide and storms will come. To pacify her, the shamans had to go to the bottom of the sea in a trance, tangle the knots in her hair, soothe her anger and plead with her to release the animal again. Only then will the storm stop. Only in this way can life return to normal. Perhaps we are still doing this in our way. When winter becomes too cold and when storms wreak havoc on us, we will look for reasons. We ask ourselves what we have done wrong. We wonder if this is a punishment for our sins, pollution, climate change and our disregard for the natural world. We try every possible way to placate the forces we don't fully understand. We comb the goddess's hair into a ball and call it meteorology. Psychologists studied a phenomenon that occurred during and after a major snowstorm, although they did not fully understand it. People say they have heard sounds that did not exist. To be precise, it's not an illusion, rather, it's more like the brain is filling the void caused by extreme sensory deprivation. During a snowstorm, when visibility drops to zero and the world turns white, and when the howling wind becomes the only constant sound, people report hearing voices in the storm, their names being called, conversations close at hand, footsteps approaching but never reaching. This is not madness. This is the brain's attempt to understand confusion and to find patterns, even when there are no patterns. The auditory cortex, deprived of its usual inputs, the various sounds of human civilization, traffic, music, and the complex acoustic environment we usually live in, began to generate its own signals. Some people said they heard music, some heard crying, and others heard laughter. The sound is always so vague that you can't be sure what you're hearing, but so clear that you can't take it as pure imagination. After the snowstorm, the snow stopped, but the world was still buried and silent. A different auditory strangeness emerged. Silence itself becomes unbearable. Snow absorbs sound. The soft and porous structure of fresh snow is one of the best sounders in nature. Several feet of snow covered everything. The ordinary environmental noises, traffic, industry, and even the sounds of nature in the world were all submerged in almost complete silence. In the first few days after the storm, people who went out on adventures said that there was a kind of almost spiritual quality in the silence. You can hear your own heartbeat. Your breathing is as loud as thunder. Although you are speaking in a normal voice, it feels like you are shouting. In that silence, some people reported hearing sounds from afar. The conversation a few blocks away was clear through the cold air. The sound of a shovel hitting the sidewalks several miles away. The bells of the town church should have been so distant that they couldn't be heard. Sound travels in different ways in the terrain after the storm. The normal sound barrier was removed. Snow reflects and guides sounds in unexpected ways. Cold and dense air transmits vibrations more effectively. But this feels like magic. It feels like the whole world has changed. A place where normal rules do not apply. The measurement methods for distance and proximity are different. There, silence can be so perfect that it becomes a voice of its own. In the weeks following the snowstorm, as the snow gradually melted, the scenery here also revealed its secrets. All the lost things have been found. The car keys lost a few months ago showed up in the parking lot. Toys from last autumn have appeared in the front yard. The small items in daily life, those that have been forgotten or misplaced, will all return as the white blanket is pulled away. But there were also even stranger discoveries. In Cleveland, the melting snow exposed the body of a woman in the alley behind the warehouse. She has been living there since November. After being determined by the police, she was murdered and then left. She was covered by the first snowfall of winter and then completely buried by the blizzard. For several months, she couldn't be seen. The snow protected her, safeguarding her from scavengers and decaying matter. That spring came early, and with the unusually warm March, she was discovered, and another case that might never be solved was uncovered. In rural Ohio, melting snow exposed a barn that had collapsed under the weight of the accumulated snow. There were 3 cows inside, frozen in the spot where the roof had collapsed. In the storm, farmers couldn't get in touch with them. A few weeks later, when he dug into the barn, they had already disappeared. That the snow preserves them very well. It seems that as long as you call them, they will wake up. Abandoned cars appeared in the strangest places, not on the way. All of these have been cleared. In the fields, in the streams, in those places that are meaningless until you remember the snowy weather, people lose their way, leave the path they think still lies beneath their feet, drive until they can no longer move, and then stop. Some cars are empty. Others took in those who did not survive. They were found sitting in the driver's seat, with the engine running out of fuel and the battery dead. The car was filled with a special cold caused by prolonged exposure. They stayed there quietly, alone, waiting for rescues that would never come. Snow covered them, concealed them, unprotected them in the final moments of their lives. Then, when its work is done and winter relaxes its control, it reveals them again. The return of offerings to the human world is evidence of the past. There is an ancient and documented memory method called the memory palace method. Imagine a building with room after room, and place the things you want to remember in specific positions within each room. To recall this information, you just need to walk through the palace in your mind, visit each location and retrieve what you have placed there. In a sense, the scenery after the snowstorm has turned into an involuntary palace of memories. Every drift, every landmark covered with snow, and every buried object have all become locations associated with the memories of the storm. Many years later, people who experienced the 1978 snowstorm would say that certain places, a certain crossroads, a small hill, or a section of highway would immediately remind them of where they were during the storm, how they felt, and what they saw. The scenery carries memories, not consciously, not intentionally, but through the connections we had established. At the gas station, you ran out of gas on your way home. You hid at school for 3 days. Your child was born in the hospital during a storm and was delivered with candles when the power went out. These places have become more than just places. They will become the chapters where you tell your own survival story. Even decades later, when you drive past them, you still remember that fear, that cold, that strange time compression that made 3 days feel like 3 weeks. When everything was finally over, I felt a great sense of relief. Memory is just like snow, layer upon layer, that covers the past, turning the past's scenery into something both familiar and strange. Sometimes, if conditions are right and you dig deep, you can find what you thought was lost. The moment was perfectly preserved, and the emotions were frozen in the crystal. On a specific afternoon, when the storm finally ended and the sun emerged, the quality of the light was precise. But memory is not like an ice core, it is unstable. Every time we visit it, it changes. The transformation of details, and notions are reinterpreted through the lens of the current environment. The storm becomes worse or better or more strange in the repetition. We added some details that we couldn't possibly know. We delete the details that do not conform to the story we have constructed. In this way, even for those who experienced a snowstorm in 1978, it became a myth. The snow is deeper than it actually is. It's getting colder. The more thorough the isolation is, the more serious the danger will be. This is not dishonesty. This is the essence of memory. We keep the important things. What matters is not always what happens, but how it feels, how it changes us, what it teaches us, and our vulnerability. In the months following the hurricane, unexpected events occurred in the art community of the Midwest. Painters, photographers, sculptors, and those who make things, those who give order and meaning to materials, find themselves drawn to the imagery of snowstorms. If they did not depict the drama of the storm, they didn't paint the environment white, nor did they have cars buried underground, nor did they carry out desperate rescue operations. On the contrary, what they draw is white itself, blankness and deficiency. The canvases that appear in the gallery are almost all white, not blank, but filled with subtle variations of white, of minus white, cream, the lightest blue and grey. Looking at them is like looking at snow. At first, they seem empty, but as you study them, you start to see textures, depth and complexity in the simplicity on the surface. Photographers captured the scene after the storm, where the earth and the sky merged into a single white continuum, the boundless expanse of space and the objects buried under the smooths. Snow worm early vein shape hints. It curves minus up of the ice crystal looks like an alien building. Sculptors use snow itself as a material to create their works. They know they are creating an art that will disappear, an art that can only exist temporarily. That was originally going to melt and be forgotten. The forms they build will eventually be destroyed by the wind and erased by the sun. Art is a contemplation of impermanence. There is something here that explains the experience of the storm. It erased the familiar scenery. It amplifies the complex world into simple elements. Cold and white survival. It reminds everyone that all our buildings, material, social and psychological, are temporary and subject to forces beyond our control. The sculptor Margaret Chen from Ann Arbor has created a series of works which she calls absent architecture. They are hollow forms, with negative spaces defined by thin shells made of semi-transparent materials. You looked at them, undiscovered something they didn't have. Those empty centers, those missing parts, those places that should have existed but didn't. To an interview a few years later, she explained, "The storm took everything away. It requires mobility, connection and certainty. It left behind these shortcomings. I want to express the feeling of something that is missing, something that has been removed, something that once existed but no longer exists. This work is very ugly, not because it is disturbing, but because it requires you to look at it in a different way, to focus on what is missing rather than what exists, and to pay attention to what is not there. Perhaps this is what the blizzard has taught us. Pay attention to the absence. Notice when the ordinary hustle and bustle of the world will fall silent. Feel the weight of emptiness. Understand that nothing is more powerful than nothing, and getting rid of something is deeper than its existence." In the years following the snowstorm, therapists in the affected areas reported an unusual pattern. Those patients who had experienced blizzards, and even those who had not suffered particular trauma, reported repeatedly dreaming of snow, cold and burial. Dreams vary, but certain themes keep recurring: trapped in a house, windows covered with snow, searching for someone in the white outdoors, walking in the boundless white landscape, without landmarks, without direction, without an end, buried alive in the snow, unable to move or breathe. The weight of the body was pressing down on it. These are not nightmares. Most people describe them as disturbing rather than terrifying, and strange rather than terrifying. The tone of this emotion is more about unease, that something is not quite right, rather than active fear. Dream researchers believe that the brain is still processing this experience, integrating extreme sensory deprivation, disruption of normal life, and the awareness of vulnerability forced by the storm. Dreams are a form of digestion, a way to metabolize experiences and integrate them into the mind's understanding of the world. But there is another explanation, less scientific, but perhaps more interesting. These dreams might be the awakening of ancestral memories. For most of human history, winter has been the greatest threat to survival. When the cold came, when food ran out, and when shelters failed, thousands of our ancestors died. This kind of memory exists in our genes and in the deep structures of the brain that evolved long before language or consciousness emerged. The blizzard of 1978 might have awakened this age-old fear, reminding us that despite having all the technology and infrastructure, we are still vulnerable to the weather, still at the mercy of systems beyond our control, and fundamentally, we are still animals trying to stay warm enough until spring. Dreams are a form of self-actualization of cognition in the unconscious symbolic language. The white landscape, the coldness that seeps into everything, the feeling of insignificance, lost in the vast and indifferent things. Dr. Alan Rosson, a psychologist working in Toledo, has collected hundreds of such dream reports. In 1982, she published a paper titled Typical Winter Dreams After Environmental Trauma. In the book, she believes that major weather events are an enlightenment, an experience that compels us to confront fundamental truths about existence, our relationship with nature, and death. She wrote that the snowstorm deprived her of the comfortable illusion of controlling everything. It reminds us that we are not separated from nature and are not protected by our technology and infrastructure. We are part of it and are subject to it. This kind of cognition, the psychological ripples generated by this forced memory, far exceed the event itself. Her work has been largely ignored by the mainstream psychological community, too poetic, too philosophical, and lacking in experience. That many years later, after other disasters, other events that forced the entire population to confront vulnerability, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, and epidemics, her framework will be examined, and people will realize that what she describes is the real thing. Collective trauma creates collective dreams, and the mind has a way to deal with shared experiences that transcend individual consciousness. This snowstorm became a shared dream for the entire region. A symbol resonates in a way of feeling rather than understanding. The unconscious brain keeps returning to this metaphor, constantly trying to integrate it, and constantly using it to express other fears and anxieties. Even today, decades later, there are still people who dream of snow, Wake up in the middle of the night, feel buried, feel the bone-minus chilling cold, and feel the wind howling at the edge of their consciousness. Long after the material snow had melted, long after the final drift had vanished, the stormy dream life continued. Memory is like water. It can change its form, but it will never truly disappear. It evaporates, condenses, and then falls in a new form. There is a paradox at the core of memory research. Our memories of traumatic events are clearer than those of secular events. The intensity of emotions seems to etch them deeper into our neural structures. However, those equally intense memories are often the most distorted and the easiest to correct and reconstruct. Those who experienced the snowstorm in 1978 remember it very clearly. Ask them and they will tell you stories. Where were they trapped? How long were they trapped? What did they eat? How did they keep warm? The details seem clear, direct and definite. However, research on the accuracy of memory shows that many details are wrong. It's not intentional, not a lie, but a reconstruction. The brain fills in the blanks with reliable information, fusing memories from different moments together, blending the details heard from other stories, and creating coherent narratives from fragments of real experiences. In 1985, researchers from the Ohio State University conducted a study, interviewing 200 people who had experienced storms. They asked in detail about their experiences, when the power went out, how much food they had, what they could see from the window, and how they communicated with others. Then, they compared these memories with the records from that time, meteorological service logs, power company outage reports, photos taken during the storm, and diaries written at that time. The difference is significant. The power outage in people's memory lasted for 3 days, but in fact it lasted for 8 hours. The food supply that people almost exhausted in their memory was actually abundant. The view seen from the window is described as completely white. In the photo, the nearby buildings are clearly visible. This does not mean that people are lying or that their memories are completely wrong. This means that memory is reconstructed rather than regenerated. We won't go back to the experience of imagining replaying the video. Every time we remember them, we rebuild them. Every reconstruction is influenced by existing knowledge, subsequent experiences, the stories we hear, and our stories about who we are and how we have survived. The snowstorm in my memory is different from the one I have now. In fact, memory storms are more dramatic, more dangerous, and more transformative. This must be because memory has played a narrative role. We don't remember to maintain the accuracy of history. We remember to create meaning. People's interpretation of the snowstorm in 1978 is of profound significance. This is the time they have survived some unusual events, the time they have proved their resilience, and the time they have come to understand what they can endure. It doesn't matter whether the actual details are exactly the same as the recorded facts. What matters is the role of memory. How does it function in a continuous self-minus story? Perhaps this is the ultimate mystery of snow. It's not just about how it drops or retains something, but how it transforms in memory. How does coldness get colder? The white has become whiter. Isolation has become more thorough. How winter survives has become the story we tell of our past selves and our future selves. Now, at this final moment, when you hear these words, perhaps you can sense the feelings of those people. You are warm, comfortable, and safe, not cold at all. It's not fear. You know how the story ended. Spring has come, and life has returned. But perhaps you can sense its strangeness. A familiar world will soon become strange. Time can be distorted under pressure. We have always been like this. All of us are far more vulnerable than we think. The snowstorm of 1978 has passed. The snow melted decades ago. Those who have experienced this disaster are getting old. Soon, people will no longer remember that White Week in January. It will become pure history, data points, archived photos, and academic papers on storm systems and emergency response. But in the ice cores of Greenland, in the dreamlike life of a region, in stories at the dining table, when the weather turns bad, someone says it's nothing. You should take a look at 78. Any survivor of a major storm has silently realized that nature is patient, powerful, and completely indifferent to our plans. The world will come to a halt and the cold will be fatal. Sometimes, survival merely depends on luck, preparation and a tenacious refusal to surrender. Snow remembers in its own way. The ice remembers, the land remembers. In the shapes of trees breaking and regenerating, in the drainage patterns after snow melts, and in the tiny ways of the landscape, it has witnessed everything it has gone through. We remember, and not completely, though the details blur and change with each repetition. We remember the white, the cold, the wind, and the weight. We remember that we survived. In our memories we prepared for the next storm, although we didn't always know. The next time the world stops functioning, it will be the next test of our vulnerability and strength. The snow will come again. It's always like this. When it comes, we will face it with any elegance we can do, knowing that winter, like all things, is temporary. You should know that spring, no matter how late it is, or how impossible it seems, is patient in the depth of January and always comes eventually. Now let's gently shift our attention to the different experiences of the same storm. For those who watch from a height, those who direct from a safe place, those who have experienced the blizzard rather than survival, those who have experienced the blizzard, those who have experienced the blizzard, those who have experienced the inconvenience or professional challenges brought by the blizzard. On the 15th floor of the State Office building in Columbus, Ohio, Governor James Rose stood by the window, watching the white expanse outside devouring his state. The glass is 3- layered and sealed to keep warm. In the wooden meeting room behind him, rescue workers and emergency coordinators gathered around a mat covered with colorful pins. Each one represents a crisis, a need, and a request for help that has yet to be responded to. The governor is 70 years old this year. He has experienced political struggles and economic crises and served as the governor of Ohio twice. Keen to nostalgia and necessity, he has returned to the position of governor. He is not easily provoked. He had witnessed strikes, riots and economic recessions, but this time was different. How many people died? He asked, not turning around the window. Some people replied that there are currently 16 confirmed cases in Ohio, but communication was cut off in most areas of the state. This number will still rise. The road nodded slowly. Below him, Columbus streets were buried. Abandoned cars dot the landscape like modern sculptures. At the building where he is located has the power. The backup generator was buzzing in the basement. Enough fuel to last for several weeks. Heat plays a role. The phone is working properly. Coffee is being made in the lounge. The sandwich was ordered from a catering service company, but somehow they simply couldn't deliver it to your door. He and his staff are all very comfortable. It's not as comfortable as at home, but it's comfortable enough to work. They can coordinate. The decision they made could affect millions of people. They are sitting in cold houses, drinking canned soup, not knowing if rescue will come. How is the situation with the National Guard? The road asked. They weren't abilized, but they couldn't move. The armory was blocked by heavy snow. Some units are trapped in their own facilities. The governor turned around from the window. Can't move, he repeated. The National Guard cannot operate in Ohio. His voice was a bit heavy. To be exact, it's not anger, but it's a bit like anger, the recognition of powerlessness. He activated the emergency response system. He declared a state of emergency. He did everything that the governor did during the crisis. However, the country remains paralyzed. He gradually realized that power is a kind of fluidity. In the snowstorm, no one is moving. In the affluent suburbs of Cleveland, such as Shack Heights, Bay Village, and Gates Mills, the experience of the storm is different from that of the working-class communities in the eastern part of the city. It's not because the snow there is not as heavy, nor because the wind is not as fierce, but because privilege has created a buffer. These large houses have multiple heating systems, stoves, yes, but also fireplaces, sometimes several. The wood is neatly stacked in the storage rooms or attached garages. When there was a power outage, as in other places, the rich people made fires to keep warm. There are more things in their pantry. This is not out of conscious preparation, that because they have more space, more money and more things, the cans on the shelves, the meat in the refrigerator, and the wine in the wine cellar. This kind of isolation is certainly uncomfortable, but it won't endanger life. Many people have generators, not industrial backup systems, but portable devices purchased for summer villas or boats, which are now taken out and connected to the necessary circuits. It's enough to open a refrigerator, a few lights and a radio to maintain a seemingly normal life. When the storm finally arrived and the roads began to be cleared, the first to be cleared were the affluent communities. It's not official. No one has issued such an order, but snow removal equipment is all concentrated in the most politically valuable areas, where those who call city councillors and know the mayor live. In Shaker Heights, a community composed of large and old houses, the main roads were accessible within 2 days. Residents conducted carefully and slowly to the reopened grocery stores and the gas stations with electricity. On Central East 55th Street, which is dominated by black people and the working class, it was impassable for a whole week. No plow came. Residents dug out their own blocks, formed volunteer teams, shared shovels and cleared the roads by hand. When the food in the grocery store is sold out, there is no other choice. When the heat source fails, there is no backup system. The same storm, the same city, to completely different experiences. No one thinks this is unfair, at least there is no official statement. It is interpreted as resource issues, priority road issues, and practical decision-making problems in difficult situations. But the pattern is very clear and very old. In a crisis, just as in peace, the comfortable remain comfortable, while the vulnerable become even more vulnerable. At the Emergency Operations Center in Lansing, Michigan, officials are coordinating response operations day and night. They have NATS communication equipment and a directed dial from the governor's office. They have authority, information and a clear sense of mission, but they also have a sense of frustration. Every decision they made encountered the same insurmountable obstacle, that is, the storm itself. They can issue commands, but these commands cannot be executed. They can deploy resources, but these resources cannot reach where they are needed. On the second day of the storm, a call came from a small town on the Upper Peninsula. The caller was a deputy sheriff who reported that the oxygen provided by the local hospital to patients on respirators was running out. They need emergency supplies. The coordinator who answered the phone assured him that someone would come to help. She marked the request as urgent and sent it to the corresponding department. In less than an hour, everything was arranged. The oxygen tanks will be loaded onto the trucks of the National Guard for transportation, so the truck wouldn't move. The road is blocked. The snow is too deep. The wind is too strong. The coordinator called the hospital back and said, "We are working hard. We are looking for helicopters, but the weather is bad and they will die." The police officer interrupted him. His voice was steady and genuine. "Without oxygen, the patient will die." "When?" "We are doing all we can." "When?" he asked again. She didn't reply. Resources do exist. Will exists, but the stormed in eyes both. The patients in that small hospital are beyond cure. It's not because no one cares, but because nature makes help impossible. Later, she learned that the hospital staff were temporarily arranged. They provided oxygen and manually ventilate patients when the oxygen supply ran out. Relying purely on determination and improvisation, they kept people alive until the storm passed and replenishment became possible. No one died, but it was still very thrilling. The woman who answered this call will remember it for many years. That feeling of helplessness, being in a warm and bright command center with all the government's resources behind, yet still powerless. It is precisely this illusion that the illusion of control is exposed. In the TV studio of the area, the host reported the news of the storm to the audience, including those who had experienced the storm and those who were watching it in safe areas. His tone was carefully adjusted, serious enough to convey the severity of the situation, but not so much as to cause panic. The anchor itself is very comfortable. The studio has electricity, heating and food. In their spare time from the radio broadcast, they drank coffee and called their families to greet them. They are professionals, doing a job and playing a role. On the screen, they talked about the developing situation and emergencies. They showed pictures of snow-covered streets, abandoned vehicles and rescue operations. These images are dramatic, but strangely purified as well. The camera sketches a scene of chaos, but fails to capture the fear of being trapped, the coldness and the boredom of despair. A female engineer named Patricia Myers, who once worked at a TV station in Cleveland, later wrote about the cognitive dissonance of this experience. I was sitting in a climate-controlled studio, wearing a skirt and high heels, telling people not to go out as the situation there was life-threatening. This disconnection is surreal. I'm recounting a disaster that I have never experienced. Radio broadcasting has a purpose. They offer information, comfort and a sense of connection. But they also create a drama. A storm became a story. The story has a narrative arc. They are dramatic, tense and determined. They have heroes, plowing drivers, emergency rescue workers, but ordinary people who help their neighbors. They often fail to show the mundane reality and just sit idly for hours in the cold. The anxiety of losing money due to missing out on work. The special pressure of being trapped in a small space with family members. Boredom and discomfort can erode one's spirit more than any dramatic moment. The media made this storm understandable. They gave it a shape and a meaning. But by doing so, they also make it less real. They turned life experiences into wonders. For the executives of large companies headquartered in the disaster-stricken areas, the snowstorm has brought another kind of challenge. Not survival, but business continuity. At TRW's headquarters in Cleveland, senior management held teleconferences from home, and most of them had longer power retention times than average because they were located in well-maintained communities. They discussed the impact on operations, quarterly forecasts and shareholder value. Meanwhile, the workers in the factories, those who actually produce the products and make profits, are trapped at home, or worse, in the factories where they were working when the storm hit. When the workers were unable to leave, some companies had already arranged CS and food. Others were not prepared for this. At an auto parts factory in Toledo, 300 workers were trapped for 2 days after a power outage, with very little food and no eating. They crowded in the lounge to share the things from the vending machine. When they were finally able to leave, they were paid for their normal working hours before the storm hit, but they received no extra pay for the time they were at rest. The executives who made this decision did so in their home offices. They had never experienced the coldness, fear or insult of being abandoned by their hard-working employers for many years. Some companies responded better. Some enterprises truly care about employee benefits, arranging emergency housing, providing additional compensation, and covering food and heating costs. But all these are exceptions. For most companies, this storm is mainly about the inconvenience in logistics, posing a threat to productivity and profits. When a CI undressed investors after the storm, he actually praised the glimmer of hope brought by the disaster. Inventory that cannot be delivered to customers can be retained and sold later as demand exceeds supply and may be sold at a higher price. The labor cost was not mentioned on the phone. Years later, labor organizers pointed out that this snowstorm was a clear moment that proved how insignificant workers' welfare was compared with commercial interests. The storm revealed the truth. Workers are resources that need to be managed, not people that need to be protected. Universities, hospitals and government buildings, these institutions withstood the storm relatively easily. They have emergency plans and backup systems. Most importantly, they have the resources brought by the scale of the institution. At Ohio State University, students who stay on campus during the holiday find themselves well taken care of. The heating and electricity in the dormitory come from the central power plant. The restaurant is still open. There is food, warmth and community there. Some students later described the storm as an almost festive celebration, a breakthrough in daily life, a shared adventure, and an excuse to extend conversations and impromptu gatherings. They are experiencing the same storm, which has caused casualties throughout the state. Yet their experiences are completely different because they are protected by the institutional infrastructure. At the Cleveland Clinic, one of the nation's top hospitals, surgeries continued with almost no interruption. The backup generator of this facility is sufficient to power a small city. When it is pitch minus to all around, the hospital remains a beacon of light and warmth. Employees who cannot go home are provided with accommodation, meals and clean clothes. The patient continues to receive world-class care. The situation was much worse at a small community hospital in a working miners class community a few miles away. The backup generator broke down on the first day. They have enough diesel fuel for 12 hours, even if they can make it work. The staff work with flashlights. They manually draw oxygen. They wrapped the newborns in blankets and held them in their arms to keep them warm. Both are hospitals. Both saved lives in the storm, but one made use of all available modern resources, while the other relied on the desperate ingenuity of exhausted staff. This gap was not planned. It is merely the cumulative result of decades of investment decisions, the outcome of resources flowing to the centers of wealth and power, and the result of a system designed to protect what is already powerful rather than support what is fragile. In the upscale restaurant district of Ann Arbor, Michigan, a restaurant named Chop House remained open during the storm. When the snowstorm hit, the shopkeeper and several staff members were there. They decided to wait for the snowstorm to pass. They put food in the refrigerator. There is wine in their wine cellar. They have a gas stove that works without electricity. For 3 days, a group of about 20 people, including staff and customers, had been eating all the time when travel was impossible. They took shelter together in an unexpected closeness. They cook meals with the restaurant's stop. They tell stories. They are playing cards by candlelight. They slept on the stalls and the floor. Many years later, some of them described it as one of the most unforgettable experiences of their lives. An adventure, an intimate moment. They were wrapped in a high-end restaurant in a snowstorm. They admitted that they were very lucky. Fortunately, I was trapped in a place with food, heating and companions. Fortunately, this storm became a story they could tell at the party, rather than a trauma they needed to overcome. Maria Santos is a cleaner in the office building in the center of Toledo. She was on duty when the storm hit. A supervisor told her and the other cleaning staff to leave early, but when she reached the bus stop, the bus had already stopped running. She tried to walk about 3 miles home, but the snow was too deep and the wind was too strong. She took refuge at a gas station, where she stayed for 2 nights, squeezing together with several other trapped workers and sharing the few snacks available in the limited stop. After the power outage, there was no heating, no comfortable stalls or wine cellars, only cold and waiting, as well as the special humiliation of being trapped in such an environment, which showed how unstable her life was. When she finally got home, she found her apartment very cold. The heating is broken. She doesn't have a fireplace or a backup system. For the next 2 days, she wore all her clothes, melted the snow into water and ate biscuits, because the shops near her home had not reopened yet. She won't say these at the party. She didn't say it was an adventure. This was just one thing she endured, another difficulty she had experienced in her life. The snowstorm did not cause inequality. It merely reveals it. Let's see the huge differences among people when experiencing the same event based on their economic environment, their location, and the way they access resources. After the storm, as the full extent of the damage became clear, charity organizations mobilized. The Red Cross has set up emergency shelters. The church organized a food donation event. Local enterprises donated supplies. The rich generously donated, wrote checks, organized fundraising activities, appeared in newspaper photos, and presented oversized checks to relief organizations. Their generosity is genuine and very helpful, and it's also very comfortable. They can donate from the surplus. The money they gave did not reduce their own sense of security or comfort. Some of their donations received tax breaks, turning charity into an investment, a way to feel good, and also reaping economic benefit. None of this is to belittle the value of the help provided. Because of these donations, people have enough to eat and wear. That the dynamics within are quite illustrative. The same storm destroyed some people, but brought inconvenience to others. These people later gained social credit for helping those they had never experienced. A wealthy suburb organized a snowstorm relief party 2 months after the snowstorm hit. A ticket price is $500 per person. This event was held in a country club. People wore dressed in evening gowns and tuxedos. They ate the meals provided by the service and danced to the live band. This event raised $50,000 for disaster relief and was regarded as a huge success. Meanwhile, in the communities where people suffered losses in the storm, recovery efforts are still ongoing. The roof is still damaged, the pipes are still broken, and the bills remain unpaid. The $50,000 helped some of them, but the contrast was also quite obvious. The rich are celebrating their charity, while those affected are still dealing with the consequences. This was not unique to the snowstorm in 1978. This is the same pattern that emerges after every disaster. Vulnerable people suffer. Comfortable assistance is often sincere and generous, but from a safe position and to create the basic structure of vulnerability, it should first remain unchanged. In the months following the storm, there were meetings, committees and reports. Government officials at all levels studied what had happened and discussed how to better prepare for future emergencies. Many suggestions are wise. Improve snow removal equipment. Establish a better emergency communications system. Build a more powerful backup power infrastructure. Formulate a more explicit plan and determine the priority of response measures. That some of the most important lessons have never been learned, or at least never implemented. This storm has revealed that poverty makes people vulnerable, inequality determines who suffers the most, and the existing system is designed to protect some rather than others. These problems cannot be solved simply by using better snow plows. They demand fundamental changes in aspects such as social structure, resource allocation, and value distribution. These changes are discussed abstractly to address systemic inequality, improve the social safety net, and ensure fair access to resources. But specific actions are limited. It is easier to purchase new equipment than to transform society. Politically speaking, focusing on technical solutions is safer than addressing power and distribution issues. Therefore, the preparatory work mainly focused on making the same system more efficient, rather than more just. Everyone agreed that the next storm would be handled better. The reaction will be faster. Communication will be clearer. The plowshares can be better distributed. But the most fundamental question is why some people have backup generators while others don't, and why some communities are snow miners cleared first while others are last. Why can some people afford the inventory in the pantry, while others can only live on their wages without any emergency buffer? This question was raised, briefly discussed, and then quietly put aside. It's too complicated, too politicized, and too much. Most people who have experienced this storm have not given much thought to these differences, at least not consciously. They focus on their own survival and their own recovery. For many people, the community's response, neighbors helping each other, and strangers sharing resources are the main memories. But for some people, especially those who have both endured the physical pain of the storm and exposed their own vulnerability, something has changed. They began to see more clearly how society is structured, how some people's lives are more valuable than others, and how disasters magnify inequalities that exist even in calm times. 5 years after the storm, a social worker in Cleveland said in an interview, "It broadened my horizons. I have always understood poverty and inequality theoretically, but seeing how people experience different things in the same storm makes me feel that it is true. The storm treats us equally. The snow falls on everyone in the same way, but the consequences are so unequal. At that time I understood that disasters do not cause injustice. It reveals it." She is not the only one who has such an understanding. Labor organizers, community activists, progressive politicians, and many others regarded the snowstorm as a moment that briefly brought to light what was usually invisible. When the comfortable myth of equality and opportunity is exposed by a simple fact, that is, who will be frozen and who will be frozen, but recognition does not automatically bring about change. After the crisis passed, most people resumed their normal lives. These lessons gradually faded away. The sense of urgency is weakened. These systems remain largely unchanged. Let's simply go back to Maria Santos, the cleaning lady we encountered earlier who was trapped at the gas station. Many years later, in an interview for an oral history project, she recalled that experience. "I remember that during the storm, I think everyone was going through this. Everyone must be cold, scared and hungry. But when the crisis was over, I heard stories of people safely getting through it in hotels, stories of governors in their warm offices, and stories of those rich people who never lost power. I realized that we weren't in the same league. We never have. She paused for a moment and then continued. The storm didn't change anything. My apartment is always very cold in winter. I'm always just one step away from disaster. The snowstorm made all this even more obvious. For a few days, I couldn't pretend that my situation was normal and that I was doing well. A storm took away the ability to disguise. This might be the last and most important contrast revealed by the snowstorm, not only because people's experiences vary with different environments, but also for some, this storm is an anomaly, a temporary deviation from normal life. This is a dramatic story, while for others, it is merely an intensification of an ongoing struggle. It's getting colder, but the cold is familiar. This kind of isolation is more thorough, but also very familiar. The fear grew stronger, but it was familiar. The storm merely turned up the volume of a song that had been playing all along. So when spring finally comes and the snow melts, the same story has two versions. In one version, the 1978 blizzard is a great equalizer. At this moment, regardless of status or wealth, everyone is facing the same challenge. This is a moment that brings the community together, showcasing the best in people and demonstrating how Americans stand united in times of crisis. This version was recounted in newspaper retrospectives, became official history on anniversaries, and in the comfortable memories of the middle class. In another version, the blizzard is the revealer of division. At this moment, the fault line of society becomes clear. The criterion for measuring comfort and pain is not character or effort, but resources and luck. This moment indicates that in the United States, even in the face of disasters, people's experiences are unequal. This version was told in the community center, in the Union Hall, and in people's conversations that these people once again realized that they could only rely on themselves, that help might not come, and that their pain was not as important as others' comfort. Both statements are correct. The storm brought the neighbors together. It also reveals how different people's experiences are. It showcases the best side of human nature. It also shows how the system is designed to protect some people while discarding others. The question is which truth you are focusing on, and this kind of attention often depends on which side of the divergence you are on. Viewed from the tower, this storm was spectacular, tragic and historic, but ultimately it was something that happened to others, something that was observed, managed and eventually overcome. Looking down, the storm is personal, existing, inevitable, something that happens to you, in your body, in your fears, in your coldness. What can be seen from the tower are patterns, systems and statistics. What can be seen below are hours, minutes, and the endless present tense of existence. Between these viewpoints, between warmth and cold, between comfort and pain, between onlookers and bearers, there exists a truth about this world, a truth illuminated by the storm but not changed. We are not all equal in a crisis. Our destiny is determined by the environment beyond our control. This society offers more protection to some people than to others. This disaster revealed the truth that was usually hidden. Seen from above, snow is beautiful. It is buried from below. That year, spring came very early, as if nature itself was sorry for the excessive winter. By mid-March, the temperature rose to between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It was unusually warm. After the severe cold of January, it was simply surreal. Some people say that the snow melts very quickly to fast. The rapid thawing caused floods in low-lying areas. Weeks of precipitation returned to liquid. That the overburdened drainage system was still damaged by the freezing. The river rose rapidly and the basement was filled up. Even after the storm passed, the destruction continued. That this world is still welcome. People stepped out of their homes, like creatures waking up from hibernation, blinking their eyes and hesitating. After so many weeks of white silence, they were astonished to discover a world full of colors and movement. The grassland looked surprisingly green against the backdrop of the remaining patches of gray snow. The bird songs have returned. The sun, which seemed weak and distant throughout the winter, now appears generous and warm to the point of luxury. You can walk outside without wearing layer upon layer of clothes. You can feel the air on your face and it doesn't hurt. You can see beyond your surroundings, the horizon once again visible, the world extending outward rather than squeezing inward. This relief is almost physical. The shoulders, which had been tense for months due to the cold, finally relaxed. Sleep has become easier and deeper. Will the pipes freeze due to the persistently low level of anxiety in winter? Can the heat be maintained? Do we have enough money? Gradually dissipate. People gathered on the outside porch and the steps in front, just to see each other again in the air. Conversations that were impossible during the storm's isolation can now take place freely. The stories are exchanged, compared and integrated into a common narrative. Where were you when it came? How long have you been without power? Have you heard the story of that storm? Experiences have turned into memories. Trauma begins to gradually transform into meaning. After that, many people tried to learn lessons from the snowstorm in 1978. What has it taught us? How will we change? Some courses are very practical. Cities and states have updated their emergency response protocols, modernized snow removal equipment. The communication system has been improved. The building code has been revised to require better insulation, a more robust heating system and backup power supply capacity. These are all good changes. They made the next winter and all the winters that followed a little safer. They reduced the possibility of similar paralysis happening again. However, there are other hard minus compile lessons existing in the bodies and minds of those who have endured suffering. The fragile systems we rely on, the infrastructure that makes modern life possible, could suddenly and completely collapse. We are always, all of us, only a few days away from the isolation of cold and hunger. Civilization is more fragile than we imagine. The lesson of adaptability: humans can endure more than they think. We adapt, improvise, and survive. We have reserves of strength and patience, which can only be revealed under pressure. A lesson from the community is that in times of crisis, people often help each other. Neighbors share resources. Strangers offer shelter. Mutual assistance bonds can even emerge in environments that seem to be designed for isolation. But there are also lessons of division. Not everyone suffers the same pain. This privilege provides protection. The existing system can better serve some people. What brings some people together also reveals the distance between others. Izzard taught all these experiences simultaneously. The most profound lessons you learn often depend on the circumstances you are enduring. Those days in January, there is a special sense of gratitude that comes from surviving difficulties. It's not the bright and subtle gratitude when receiving a gift, but something quieter and more profound. Thank you for still being here and for getting through the tough times. In the months following the storm, many people felt this way. People cherish even more the tiny comforts: the available heating, the unobstructed roads, the ability to buy food in stores, and the sounds of vehicles that were once just background noise, but now mark the return to normal life. They view their homes in different ways. Those walls that seem to have only played a role in the storm now feel protective and are almost sacred. These walls keep the cold out. This roof withstood the weight of the snow. This place sheltered them. They also have different opinions of others. The pale Ola who cleared the streets became an admired figure rather than someone taken for granted. The utility workers who restored power were sincerely thanked. It was not obvious before that grocery store clerks would go to work despite difficult conditions. As the memory of the storm gradually faded away, this high recognition and gratitude for the ordinary also gradually vanished. This is human nature. We adapt to comfort as quickly as we adapt to hardship. The abnormal becomes normal. Unusual things have become routine, but somehow, this awareness has always been there. There is a tiny voice in the mind recalling, which whispers quietly when the heating is turned on or the lights remain bright. This cannot be guaranteed. This is not a gift. This can be taken away. It's not necessarily a voice of anxiety, rather, it's more a voice of admission, a voice that doesn't take what might be lost for granted. The snowstorm in 1978 has become one of the common reference points for defining a generation's memory of a place. If you lived in the Midwest or the Northeast that winter, you would have a story about where you were, what you experienced, and how you survived. These stories were told over and over again at family gatherings, at work, and to children and grandchildren. Every time it is told, the story is evolving. Details are added or reduced. Emotions are emphasized or minimized. This kind of narrative is formed for different purposes: to entertain, to teach, to connect, to explain who the narrators are and what they have overcome. Some stories emphasize adventure, the excitement brought by storms, the novelty of disrupting daily life, and the comradeship of sharing joys and sorrows together. These are all good stories for gatherings, casual chats, and sharing experiences. Other stories emphasize pain, coldness, fear, loneliness, and loss. These stories are told more quietly in intimate moments or during therapy, as the genuine impact can be acknowledged rather than softened into anecdotes. There are also some stories that emphasize contrast, the differences between the past and the present, hardship and comfort, winter and spring. These stories remind us to make progress, and remind us that we have emerged from that difficult period. Some stories were never told at all. Some experiences remain private, intimate, too painful or too complex to be transformed into narratives. But almost frozen person, the relationship broken under pressure, the fear that cannot be admitted because admitting it is equivalent to admitting vulnerability. All these told and untold stories have become part of the collective memory of the snowstorm. They from an archive, not precisely recording the facts, but documenting the significance of this storm to those who have experienced it. Today, decades later, the snowstorm of 1978 has become history. Those who experienced it in adulthood are now either old or no longer around. The children who have experienced it are all middle-aged people. Their memories are filtered over time, and due to the special distortion of childhood memories, the world has changed. Weather forecasts have been greatly improved. The climate pattern has changed. The seemingly unprecedented storm of 1978 has been matched or surpassed by other events. But the snowstorm is still significant, at least in the regional memory. It represents something, a special sign of winter, a specific era, a special relationship between humans and the weather, a relationship that is becoming increasingly distant. It's hard for today's young people to imagine the story of a snowstorm. In an era of constant connection, ubiquitous smartphones, instant access to information, truly isolated thoughts, inability to communicate, and inability to know what is happening around you seem almost impossible. "Can't you just make a phone call?" they asked. "Can't you look it up online? Can't you track the storm in real time?" No, you can't. This is part of the reason why it has become what it is today: a lonely, uncertain weight that doesn't know when it will end. This distance creates a myth. This storm might have become larger, more dramatic and more transformative in memory than in reality. That turned into a story about the past, when things were harder, people were stronger, and winters were older. It doesn't matter whether this myth is accurate or not. What matters is what it represents. Reconnection with the past, to some extent, feels more direct, more practical, and more genuine than the digital present that is being mediated. Where you lie there listening to this story, you feel very warm. Perhaps you are lying on a bed heated to a comfortable temperature, covered with a blanket. Perhaps you are sitting on a chair, relaxed and safe. The outside world might be very cold, but you are protected. This point is worth acknowledging. This kind of comfort, this kind of security, these things are neither universal nor permanent. They are the result of systems and structures, the result of resources and luck, and the result of living at a specific time and place. People who experienced the 1978 snowstorm would be surprised by what we now take for granted: the ability to check weather forecasts on the device in your pocket, insulation of modern buildings, the reliability of power grids, and the complexity of emergency response. We are now more resilient to winter than ever before. During the cold months, the hardships of life were once inevitable. This kind of protection has come at an environmental, social, and psychological cost. But this is also a true achievement, alleviating pain and bringing comfort and safety to more people. However, winter still came. The snow is still falling. If you are exposed to the cold for a long enough time, it can still be fatal. Nature has not been tamed, it has only been temporarily controlled. The system that protects us is robust, but not indestructible. The comfort we experience is real, but also accidental. The snowstorm in 1978 reminded us of this. This reminds us that in our advanced technological and climate-controlled environment, we are still mammals, trying to keep warm enough to survive. It is still very easy to be influenced by the elements we are striving to get rid of. After the storm, after thaw, after recovery and reconstruction, life returned to its rhythm. Spring gives way to summer, from summer to autumn, and then from autumn to winter, although the next winter was mild, so mild that it was almost apologetic. Daily life begins again. Work and study, shopping and social responsibility, minus thousands upon thousands of small tasks in life. The storm has become a memory, a story, and history. But some things still exist. Perhaps it's a slight shift in perspective. Examine what is important and what is not. Those who freeze together at gas stations or in living rooms, those who share food, warmth and fear, they still remember the feeling when ordinary things vanished and only survival mattered. They carried this memory down. They're not always conscious of it, nor do they necessarily change their daily behaviors in some way. But somewhere behind the scenes, in a quiet knowledge, this might happen again. The world can stop. The comfortable rhythm might be disrupted. Survival is not guaranteed. This perception makes some people anxious, causing them to make more preparations, be more worried and hold on to security and certainty more tightly. It makes others feel more realistic, more grateful for the warm house and the ordinary wonders filled with refrigerators, as well as the ability to move freely around the world. It also makes others more compassionate, more aware of their own and others' vulnerabilities, more likely to offer help when they can, share when there is extra, and more likely to recognize that luck and circumstances can separate comfort from pain better than character or effort. All these reactions are reasonable. All of these are ways to integrate experiences, to gain meaning from difficulties, and to inherit some lessons from those white days. In the stories and myths of different cultures, winter has never been merely a season. It is a state of existence, a metaphor for hardship, death, waiting and patience. When life regresses, when growth comes to a halt, and when we have to rely on what we stored up during easy times. The snowstorm in 1978 conformed to this ancient pattern. This is severe winter, severe winter, severe winter, severe winter. This is to simplify life to the most basic things: warmth, food, shelter and connection. Everything else vanished. In this simplification, it reveals what humanity needs, what we can tolerate, and how we treat each other when the comfortable illusion of civilization is temporarily deprived. Winter always comes to an end. This is the commitment that keeps us going even in the darkest and coldest days. Spring has come, and warmth will return. This is temporary, no matter how long it feels at this moment. The blizzard has ended, spring has come, and life has returned to normal. But winter will come again. Different winters may take on different forms. But an equally important fact is that we are vulnerable, while nature is powerful. Survival requires both individual resilience and collective care. People who experienced the 1978 snowstorm understood this and carried it forward, telling their stories and passing on any wisdom they drew from the experience. Now, as you gradually fall asleep, as your breathing slows down and your thoughts calm down, perhaps you can also move forward with something. Don't be anxious about the storms of the future, but rather recognize the comfort of the present. It's not that I'm afraid of winter, but that I'm grateful for the warmth. You are safe tonight. The walls around you support you. Heat plays a role. You've had enough. This doesn't mean there's nothing. This is all. The snow has melted. The story has already been told. These lessons have been learned, or haven't been learned yet, or have been learned but forgotten. They must be learned again. The snowstorm of 1978 has become history. The materials in the archives, the yellowed photos, the faded memories, and the people who have experienced all of this are getting old. Their numbers are decreasing year by year, and they are moving towards the future with first-hand experiences. But in the ice cores of Greenland, something still exists. In the annals of that harsh winter, in the subtle changes of building codes and emergency protocols, in the stories still being told at the dining table, in some corner of consciousness, in the quiet consciousness, winter may be cruel, and we are insignificant before it, but we can endure it. Later in this day, as you sink deeper and deeper into comfort and warmth and gradually fall asleep, Perhaps the snowstorm will give you your last lesson. The hard days passed. After winter came spring, and our adaptability exceeded our imagination. The coldness of January will give way to the warmth of June. Always, eventually, without exception, the white days are over. No matter how much this world has been buried, it will always reappear. Morning came, and so did the dawn. Sleep now. Let the story calm down. Let the snow in your heart gently fall. Cover everything with soft weight. Be quiet. Slow down your thoughts. Let winter do its job. This is the necessary rest recovery, and the long darkness to prepare for the return of light. You are warm. You are safe. The storm has passed. When you wake up in the morning, the world is still there, familiar and precious, ordinary yet magical, perhaps cold, but enduring, always enduring. Before that, take a rest. The snow in memory gently falls, covering everything in white. You gently float to that quiet place, where stories turn into dreams and history into sleep. The cold recedes, leaving only warmth. Rest now. The blizzard is over and spring has come. How to sleep. Thank you for accompanying me through this quiet journey in the winter of 1978.